The tires hit the gravel like a thunderclap. 3 black SUVs and 2 white government vans slammed to a stop just outside the mouth of the tunnel on the east edge of the Weston rail yard. The headlights carved through the pre-dawn dark like searchlights, flooding every inch of shadow with a hard, accusatory white. Doors flew open before the engines fully died. Boots hit the ground. Radios crackled with static-laced urgency. Hands moved to holsters. Federal agents. Nobody move. The command bounced off the tunnel walls, off the cracked concrete and rusted drainage pipes, off the thin sheet of fog that hovered 2 feet above the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train moaned as it rounded a bend, low and mournful, like the night itself was bracing for what was about to happen. 6 ICE agents moved in a practiced tactical sweep, flashlight beams cutting left and right. Behind them, 2 more agents hung back near the vans, hands on their weapons, eyes scanning the tree line. They were looking for someone. They were certain he was here, and they were certain he was dangerous. What they were not certain about, what none of them had even considered, was the man already sitting at the center of it all. He was seated on a weathered milk crate, just inside the tunnel's mouth, out of the worst of the wind. A wool blanket draped across his shoulders. A small fire, nearly spent coals now, glowing orange beneath a bent tin coffee can, sat on the ground 2 feet in front of him. He had a cup in his hands. He was drinking it slowly. His eyes tracked the approaching agents with no more alarm than if they were pigeons landing on a park bench. He did not stand. He did not flee. He did not flinch. The lead agent, a wide-shouldered man named Reyes, badge clipped to his vest, jaw set like a man who believed very deeply in his own authority, stopped 3 feet from the seated man and planted himself. "Where is Marcus Hale?" The man on the milk crate looked up at Reyes slowly. He took another sip of his coffee, set the cup down on the ground beside him, folded his hands in his lap. "You're about to make a mistake," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, like a man who had nothing left to lose and had learned, somewhere deep in his past, that this particular kind of peace was its own kind of power. "He's already on his way." Reyes stared at him. The other agents stilled. Nobody was entirely sure what to do with that. You're watching true black struggles. Stories where injustice meets power, and the truth always wins. Subscribe for more stories like this. Reyes recovered fast. He was good at that, snapping back into procedure whenever something caught him off guard. He turned to the nearest agent. "Sweep the tunnel. All the way back." Agents surged past the seated man, flashlights blazing, boots scraping on loose concrete. They overturned cardboard boxes, kicked through a stack of damp newspapers, swept a rusted shopping cart out of the way with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. They searched behind a makeshift plywood partition. They checked the drainage alcoves on both sides. They found nothing. No Marcusale. No weapons. No contraband. Just the remnants of a life lived on the margins. A sleeping bag rolled into the corner. A plastic crate of canned goods. A folded photograph tucked carefully inside a waterproof bag. Reyes crouched to look the seated man in the eye. "You're harboring a fugitive. That makes you an accessory. You understand that?" The man tilted his head slightly. "I don't obstruct. I wait." "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what I said." Reyes straightened up. He glanced at the agent to his left, a younger man named Colt, quick-tempered and eager to prove something, and gave a short nod. Colt moved forward, grabbed the seated man roughly by the shoulder. The man didn't resist. He simply looked down at Colt's hand on his shoulder the way a professor might look at a student who'd just given a very wrong answer. And then they heard it, low at first, almost below the threshold of hearing, more of a vibration in the chest than a sound in the ears. But it was there, growing, somewhere to the east, beyond the rail yard, beyond the fog-shrouded access road, engines. Multiple engines. The deep, rhythmic pulse of motorcycles, still at distance, but moving with steady, inevitable purpose. "Ignore that," Reyes said, scanning the road. "Focus on him." The man on the milk crate said nothing, but at the corner of his mouth, so faint it barely registered, he smiled. To understand why he smiled, you have to go back 7 months. It was a different kind of night then. November, the rain coming down in sheets so thick you could barely see your hand in front of your face. The kind of rain that didn't fall so much as attack. The tunnel was the same tunnel, cold and concrete and indifferent. The man, his name was Elias, had been living there since August, after the shelter on Meridian closed due to a funding cut that nobody in City Hall seemed particularly bothered about. He heard the noise around 2 in the morning. Not rain, not train, something wet and desperate. A body, moving fast, half stumbling through the drainage ditch at the tunnel's east entrance. Elias was on his feet before he was fully awake, instinct preceding reason, something in him alert even in the depths of exhaustion. The man who collapsed at the tunnel's entrance was large. Broad shoulders, heavy boots, motorcycle jacket soaked through. He had 2 wounds. A deep gash above his left eyebrow that was bleeding freely, and what looked like a bullet graze along his right forearm, the skin torn and raw. He was conscious, barely. He looked up at Elias with eyes that had already done the math and landed somewhere between resigned and desperate. "Don't call anyone," the man rasped. "Please." Elias didn't answer right away. He stood in the rain and looked at the stranger, looked at the blood, at the jacket, at the controlled fear in his eyes, and made a decision that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with what kind of man he'd chosen to remain, even out here, even like this. He pulled the man inside. He had clean rags, he always kept clean rags, and a bottle of iodine from a donated first aid kit. He cleaned the head wound carefully, pressed a folded cloth to it, held pressure until the bleeding slowed. He cleaned the arm. He wrapped it. He built the fire up and set the tin can to heat and made the man drink water until some color returned to his face. It took over an hour before the man could speak without his voice shaking. "Marcus Hale," the man said. He didn't offer it as an introduction so much as a confession. "You know the name?" "I know the name," Elias said. He kept his voice neutral. Everybody in that part of the city knew the name. Marcus Hale led the Iron Compass, 300 riders, chapters in 5 states, known to law enforcement as a criminal organization, known to most of the communities they operated in as something considerably more complicated than that. "Then you know I'm not safe to help." "I already helped you," Elias said simply. "So that ship has sailed." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you?" "Just a man who was here. That's all." Marcus stayed for 2 days. He slept on the sleeping bag while Elias took the ground. He ate from Elias's canned goods and drank his water and never once asked for anything beyond what was offered. When he was well enough to move, he stood and reached into his jacket and tried to press a folded envelope into Elias's hands. "No," Elias said. "It's cash. It's yours." "I didn't do it for cash." Marcus stood with the envelope in his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then he put it away. He looked at Elias with an expression that had some gratitude in it. Yes, but something harder beneath that. Something that looked almost like recognition. Like he'd just met a kind of person he'd nearly forgotten existed. "One day someone will come for you," Marcus said quietly. "Remember this." He walked out of the tunnel into the thin winter morning. Elias watched him go. Then he sat back down on his milk crate and picked up his coffee. Back in the present, Colt's hand was still on Elias's shoulder. The rumbling in the distance was getting louder. Reyes was on his radio, clipped voice, controlled urgency. Subscribe to True Black Struggles for more stories where the powerless rise against injustice. Don't miss out. Reyes clicked off his radio and looked down at Elias with the practiced, stone-faced authority of a man who believed that authority was something you wore, like a badge, and that wearing it long enough made it real. "Stand up," he said. Elias looked at the ground for a moment, then at Reyes. Then, slowly, with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who was choosing to comply rather than being forced to, he stood. He was taller than he'd seemed sitting down. 6'2" at least, lean, with the kind of stillness in his body that made the agents around him subtly recalibrate. Not because he was threatening, he wasn't, but because that kind of stillness in a situation like this read as something they didn't have a manual for. "You have a warrant?" Elias asked. "We don't need one. Exigent circumstances." "Who's the subject of those circumstances?" Marcus Hale. And your probable cause that he is or was here? Reyes's jaw tightened. Confidential tip. So a guess, Elias said. Not challenging. Just clarifying. Step to the wall. Elias took a step toward the tunnel wall. Colt moved with him, hands still hovering. One of the other agents, a woman named Pratt who'd been silent until now, pulled handcuffs from her belt. You're hiding someone, aren't you? Colt said, close to Elias's ear, voice dropping to something meant to unsettle. You can just tell us. Save yourself the trouble. No, Elias said. I'm waiting for someone who remembers a promise. Colt frowned. Pratt paused with the cuffs half raised. Even Reyes, who was now scanning his phone with sharp, irritated focus, glanced up at that. Outside the tunnel, the sound had changed. It wasn't distant anymore. It was close, deep-throated and unhurried, the kind of sound that comes from engines built to last, ridden by people with nowhere they need to be other than exactly where they're going. And it was coming from two directions now. North Road, and the rail yard access from the south. The two agents near the vans looked at each other. Reyes, one of them called. We've got inbound, multiple vehicles, east access, and, he stopped, turned, south too. Reyes straightened his spine and turned toward the tunnel entrance. In his peripheral vision, he could see the agents inside the tunnel pausing their search, attention drifting toward the sound. He didn't snap at them to refocus, because he was drifting too. The shadows at the tunnel mouth moved. Then the headlights appeared 1, 2, 4, 8, cutting through the fog in a slow, measured procession. Not rushing, not aggressive, just present. And then, silence. The engines cut all at once like a conductor had given the signal. The headlights remained. The fog shifted. And in the sudden quiet, you could hear the wind moving through the tunnel and nothing else. They came forward slowly. 12 of them, on either side, 6 from the north access road, 6 from the south rail yard entrance. They moved on foot now, helmets still on, hands visible. No one reached for anything. No one rushed. They walked with the quiet, deliberate certainty of people who knew exactly what leverage felt like and had no need to perform it. The man in front was the last to remove his helmet. He tucked it under one arm and stood at the edge of the light, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 40s, with close-cropped hair showing the first strands of silver, and a face that had absorbed a considerable amount of the world's weight and come out the other side with something that wasn't quite serenity but was in the same neighborhood. Marcus Hale looked past the ICE agents. He looked past the vans and the tactical vests and the holsters. He looked at Elias, standing against the tunnel wall with Pratt's handcuffs half extended toward him, and something moved across Marcus's face, swift and quiet, like weather passing over a ridge. Why is he in cuffs? His voice was level, not raised. The question wasn't directed at anyone in particular and everyone at once. Reyes stepped forward, planting himself as the clear authority. We're conducting a federal investigation. Who are you and what is your business here? Marcus Hale. Iron Compass. And this is a public infrastructure access point, so my business here is lawful assembly and the reasonable inquiry of why a civilian is being placed in restraints without visible cause. Mr. Hale, you are a person of interest in. On what warrant? Marcus asked, still level, not moving from where he stood. Exigent circumstances allow. Exigent circumstances require an objective, articulable basis that evidence will be destroyed or a suspect will flee imminently. You found him sitting on a milk crate drinking coffee. That is not exigency. That is a visit. Silence. The fog moved. Reyes looked at Marcus Hale, at the 12 riders flanking the tunnel entrance, at the phones, 3 of them minimum, openly recording from various angles, held up without drama or provocation, just there, capturing everything with the steady patience of people who had learned that the recording itself was often the most powerful thing in the room. Pratt's hands, Reyes noticed without acknowledging, had lowered the handcuffs. Obstruction of a federal investigation, Reyes said, but some of the steel had left his voice. That's the charge. What investigation? You haven't named a case number. You haven't presented a warrant. You haven't demonstrated nexus between this man and any identifiable crime. You've swept his living space without consent and found nothing, which means you've also potentially violated his Fourth Amendment protections. Marcus paused. Our legal team was notified 4 minutes ago. They'd like to speak with whoever's in command here. A phone in Marcus's left hand. Already connected. Reyes stood very still for a moment. He was doing the calculation, the one that every agent does in those suspended seconds when the situation stops matching the briefing and the decision tree doesn't have a clear next branch. If you want to see more true struggles like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. True black struggles. Stories where injustice meets power, and the truth always wins. What happened next had none of the drama that the situation seemed to promise. That was, in its own way, the most powerful thing about it. Marcus Hale didn't advance on the ICE agents. He didn't threaten them or provoke them or give them any of the reactions they were trained and braced for. Instead, he did something that confounded every tactical calculation Reyes had been running since the moment the first headlight appeared at the tunnel mouth. He sat down. He walked past 2 agents, who stepped back instinctively without being asked, and lowered himself onto the ground a few feet from Elias, cross-legged, phone in his lap, and waited. The other riders, taking their cue from Marcus, settled as well. Some leaned against the tunnel walls. Some stood easily, arms loose at their sides. None of them spoke. None of them moved in ways that could be characterized as aggressive. They simply occupied the space with the unhurried mass of people who knew they had the law on their side and the night on their side and the lenses of a dozen phones on their side. Reyes stepped away from the scene, pressing his radio to his mouth, voice dropping low. He was calling someone. Above him, the cadence of the conversation. Short answers, long pauses, the stiffening of the spine, told its own story. Colt, standing near Elias, leaned slightly and said, "Lo, what is this?" He wasn't asking Elias. He wasn't asking anyone, really. He was asking the situation. But Elias answered anyway. This is what happens when someone doesn't forget. 2 of the riders nearest the van had pulled out their phones and begun live streaming, quietly identifying themselves, noting the time and location, narrating the scene in the calm, methodical tone of people who had done this before. Not performance. Documentation. Every agent present understood the difference. Every agent present understood what it meant. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, typed something, then looked at Reyes. Our counsel is requesting the badge numbers of all officers present and a copy of whatever authorization was used to initiate this contact. That's a lawful request. Reyes turned back to the scene slowly. His face had the particular blankness of a man reevaluating a situation in real time and not entirely pleased with what the reevaluation was producing. He looked at Elias, at the now uncuffed wrists, at the milk crate, at the spent fire. He looked at Marcus Hale, sitting on the ground in a federal operations zone with the calm authority of a man conducting a business meeting. The subject of our investigation, Reyes said finally, is not present at this location. That's been established, Marcus said. What happens now? The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. Reyes stood there for 11 seconds. Someone counted. One of the live streamers noted it afterward, in the comment section of a video that would accrue 300,000 views by mid-morning. 11 seconds of silence, and then a federal agent blinked first. We're concluding operations at this location, Reyes said. He turned to his team. Pack it up. There was a moment, brief, subtle, but real, where the agents looked at each other in the way people do when the expected conclusion of something turns out to be nothing at all. Then they began to move. The deliberate, face-saving efficiency of a retreat that no one was supposed to call a retreat. The last van backed out of the tunnel approach and turned toward the main road. The red tail lights winked and diminished and disappeared into the fog. The riders remained, quiet and steady, until the sound of the federal vehicles faded entirely. Then, slowly, the atmosphere in the tunnel changed. It didn't exactly relax. Elias had never seen Marcus Hale relax, not truly, but it softened. The held breath of the last 2 hours finally released. Marcus stood. He dusted off his jeans with a couple of unhurried swipes of his hand, the same way he might after a long ride, and turned to look at Elias. He crossed to him in a few steps and crouched down to Elias's level, the way you do when you want a conversation that's between equals, and looked at him for a moment without speaking. "You saved my life," Marcus said. "I don't forget." Elias looked at him steadily. "I know you don't." 7 months, Marcus said. "I've been trying to find you. Kept hearing you moved on. Thought maybe you'd left the city. Didn't have anywhere to go," Elias said simply. Something passed across Marcus's face at that. Not pity. Elias would have withdrawn from pity. Something more complicated. More honest. "I want to make this right." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "We've got a place. South Side. House we own free and clear. Use it for members who need transition. We've got room. It's yours. No strings. No obligation to the club. Just a place that's stable and safe." Elias looked at Marcus for a long moment. The tunnel was quiet around them. The other riders had given them space. Standing back, talking among themselves in low voices, not watching. Giving them the dignity of a private conversation in a very public place, which was its own kind of grace. "I didn't save you for protection," Elias said. He kept his voice even. Not cold, but clear. "I know that. I didn't save you so I could collect something later. I know that too." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's actually exactly why I'm here." Elias was quiet. "A man who helps because it's right, not because he wants something in return. That's the rarest thing I've encountered in 30 years of moving through this world," Marcus said. "And what happened to you where you ended up, that's not justice. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering what's right." There was a long pause. Somewhere outside, the freight train sounded again. Close now, passing the North Bend, its low horn carrying across the rail yard like punctuation. "I'll take the place," Elias said finally. "I won't take the affiliation. Never asked for it. And I won't take anything I can't pay back in some form. Work, maintenance, whatever the property needs." Marcus studied him. Then he nodded. "Deal." They shook hands. Not the quick, perfunctory shake of a transaction. A real one. The kind that has weight in it. The motorcycles left as they arrived, with a kind of unhurried, collective authority that made the fog seem to part for them. One by one, engines turned over and idled, then settled into that deep, rolling rhythm that carries farther than it seems it should. They turned south at the rail yard gate, headlights sweeping across the gravel. And then the procession curved east along the access road and thinned and dimmed and finally dissolved into the dark. Elias stood at the tunnel mouth and watched them go. He had his blanket around his shoulders and his coffee, cold by now, but he drank it anyway, and he stood in the place where the chaos had been and listened to the morning come in. Birds somewhere in the tree line, the distant moan of another freight train, the soft sigh of wind across open ground. He thought about the last 7 months. About the rain that November night and the man bleeding in the ditch and the decision he'd made that took no time at all, because some decisions have already been made by the time you're asked to make them. Made by character, by history, by the kind of person you decided to be before you even knew you were deciding. They had seen a homeless black man. They had seen vulnerability and assumed that vulnerability meant powerlessness. They had seen poverty and assumed that poverty meant isolation. They had seen a man alone on a milk crate in a concrete tunnel at 4 in the morning, and assumed that alone meant abandoned. They had not seen the rain. They had not seen the long nights and the clean rags and the tin can fire. They had not seen a man choose, in a moment when he had nothing left to lose, to give anyway, and in doing so, forge the kind of debt that money cannot create and time cannot erase. They had not seen, until it was too late, the kind of loyalty that money can't buy. Elias finished his coffee, rinsed the cup with a splash of water from his bottle, folded his blanket with care and set it on the milk crate. He reached inside the plywood alcove and retrieved the waterproof bag, the one with the folded photograph, and tucked it under his arm. He had a place to go. He had some work to do when he got there. And somewhere across the city, in a house on the south side that had a working heater and a kitchen and a front door with a lock, a room was waiting for him. Not charity, not pity. A room that had been offered and accepted on terms both parties could live with. The simplest and rarest kind of transaction there is. He walked out of the tunnel into the thin early light. The morning was cold and clear, the fog finally beginning to lift, the sky going from deep purple to something approaching pale gray above the eastern tree line. His footsteps crunched on the gravel as he moved toward the access road. He didn't look back at the tunnel. Behind him, on the ground near the spent fire, the wind turned over one of the damp newspaper pages, lifted it briefly, set it down again. The milk crate sat empty in the gray morning light. The whole tunnel was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows something significant, that holds its shape a little longer than ordinary silence. And this wasn't the last time power would show up for him. That, too, is a story worth telling. A story about what happens when a man who gave everything away, his security, his comfort, the last reserves of whatever ordinary people hold back for themselves, finds out that the world sometimes has been paying attention all along. But that's for next time. For now, the morning, the road, the first quiet steps of a man walking toward something that might, for once, be solid beneath his feet. Subscribe for more true black struggles. Stories where injustice meets power, and the truth always wins. Don't miss the next story. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment.